Once upon a time, in a small village surrounded by green hills and wide rivers, lived a young woman named Judith. She was the daughter of humble, God-fearing parents who raised her with love and devotion to faith. Judith was known for her kind heart. She helped the elderly, shared her food with the hungry, and prayed for anyone in need. Everyone in the village respected her and often said, "Judith's prayers can open the heavens." But life in the village was tough. Judith dreamed of a better future and wanted to make something of herself. One day, she bid farewell to her family and boarded a rickety bus to the city. "I will not only succeed," she told her mother before leaving, "but I'll make sure I bring light to people's lives." The city was a world of its own, noisy, bustling, and filled with people who barely stopped to greet one another. Judith rented a small room in a crowded neighborhood. Though life was challenging, she never gave up. She found solace in a small church called Eternal Grace Church. The church was always alive with singing, prayers, and testimonies of miracles. The pastor, a charismatic man named Reverend Ben, welcomed Judith warmly. She quickly became an active member, joining the prayer team and volunteering to clean the church. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. Soon, everyone admired her for her humility and passion. One Sunday morning, something remarkable happened. During the service, an old blind woman shuffled to the front of the church. She had tears in her eyes as she told the congregation how Judith's prayers had restored her sight. Gasps echoed through the room as the woman cried, "I was in darkness for 10 years, but after Judith prayed for me, I can see again." Judith was shocked. She had prayed for the woman, but she had no idea her prayers could cause such a miracle. The congregation erupted in praise, shouting, "Hallelujah!" People began to gather around Judith, calling her blessed and chosen by God. From that day on, Judith's life changed. Word of her healing powers spread across the city like wildfire. People began flocking to Eternal Grace Church, hoping she would pray for them. The once quiet Judith found herself surrounded by crowds, all begging for her attention. But with fame came pressure. Reverend Ben saw an opportunity to expand the church. He encouraged Judith to lead prayer sessions, telling her, "The Lord is using you for something greater. Don't hold back His power." Judith wanted to obey God, but deep inside she felt overwhelmed. One night, while she was alone in her small room, Judith knelt to pray. "Lord, if this is your will, give me the strength to carry it. But if it's not, please guide me away." She waited for a sign but heard nothing except the hum of the city outside her window. As the weeks passed, Judith's reputation grew even more. People began offering her gifts, money, food, and jewelry, as thanks for her prayers. At first, she refused, saying, "I cannot take what belongs to God." But Reverend Ben insisted, "It's their gratitude for the blessings God gave them through you. Don't reject it." Judith began to accept the gifts, thinking it was harmless. Yet she noticed something strange. The more she prayed for people and accepted their offerings, the more they came back with bigger requests. They weren't seeking God, they were seeking her. Despite her doubts, Judith tried to focus on doing good. One evening, a woman approached her after service. The woman was well-dressed and spoke with a commanding voice. "Judith," she said, "you are meant for greater things. There's a gathering of spiritual leaders next month. If you want to grow in your gift, you should attend." Judith hesitated. "I don't know. I'm not sure this is right." The woman smiled, her eyes gleaming. "Pray about it. But remember, if you truly want to serve God, you must be willing to go deeper." That night, Judith couldn't sleep. Her mind was filled with questions. What was this gathering? Why did she feel uneasy? And why did it seem like the answers she sought were just out of reach? Little did Judith know, This was the beginning of a journey that would test everything she believed in. The days passed quickly, and Judith couldn't shake the woman's words from her mind. She prayed tirelessly for guidance but felt no clear answer. In her heart, she wanted to serve God, yet a quiet fear lingered, whispering that something wasn't right. Eventually, she decided to attend the gathering. If this will make me a better servant of God, she reasoned, then I must go. Judith shared her decision with Reverend Ben, who seemed unusually pleased. This is a rare opportunity, he said, his voice brimming with excitement. Not everyone is invited to such gatherings. Go with confidence. You are destined for greatness. On the day of the event, Judith traveled to an upscale part of the city she had never visited before. The gathering took place in a grand hall that sparkled with crystal chandeliers and golden walls. The air was heavy with the scent of incense, and a low hum of whispered prayers filled the room. As Judith entered, she saw men and women dressed in flowing robes, their faces calm but their eyes sharp. They spoke of miracles, power, and divine revelations. It felt both holy and strange, like she had stepped into a world she didn't fully understand. A woman in a dark green robe approached Judith and introduced herself as Mama Ruth. Her presence was commanding, her words smooth and reassuring. You have been chosen, she said, taking Judith's hand. Tonight, you will unlock the full potential of your gift. Judith felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? She asked nervously. Mama Ruth smiled, her eyes narrowing. Every great servant of God must make sacrifices. Tonight, you will learn what it means to truly surrender. Judith followed Mama Ruth into a smaller room lit only by candles. In the center was a table covered with a crimson cloth. Strange symbols were drawn on the walls, and a faint rhythmic drumbeat seemed to pulse from nowhere. Place your hands on the table, Mama Ruth instructed. Judith hesitated but obeyed. As soon as her palms touched the cloth, a sharp pain shot through her chest, and the room seemed to grow darker. Do you want power to heal the sick, raise the dead, and speak the mind of God? Mama Ruth's voice was now deeper, almost echoing. Judith felt frozen, unable to move or speak. You must offer something precious, Mama Ruth continued. A part of yourself that can never be replaced. Judith finally found her voice. I don't understand. What are you asking for? Mama Ruth leaned in close, her breath cold against Judith's skin. Your ability to bear children. Surrender it, and you will receive unmatched power. The choice is yours. Judith's heart raced. This couldn't be right. She had always dreamed of being a mother someday. But Mama Ruth's words rang in her ears. Do you want to truly serve God? In a haze of confusion and fear, Judith whispered, if this is what it takes to do God's work, then I surrender. The room suddenly erupted in a blinding light. Judith felt an unbearable heat rush through her body, followed by a deep, chilling emptiness. When the light faded, she collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. You have been marked, Mama Ruth declared. From this day forward, you will walk in power. Judith returned home that night, her body weak but her mind buzzing with questions. She tried to convince herself she had done the right thing, but a gnawing doubt remained. In the following weeks, her fame grew even more. People claimed that Judith could now see into their lives, revealing their deepest secrets. She is no longer just a prayer warrior, they said. She is a prophetess. But not everyone was convinced. In the same church, a young woman named Mercy began to notice strange patterns. Mercy had always admired Judith's dedication, but something felt different now. She observed how certain people came to the church repeatedly, claiming new miracles each time. One day, she overheard a man laughing and saying, "That was easy money." They believed every word. Mercy's heart sank. Were these miracles real, or was something sinister at play? She decided to pay closer attention. One evening after the church service, Mercy lingered behind, pretending to tidy up. She saw Judith enter a private room with Reverend Ben and several strangers. Quietly, Mercy pressed her ear against the door. "She's ready for the next level," a man's voice said. "Her spirit is strong, and the congregation is under her control. But she must not falter," Reverend Ben replied. "If she questions the source of her power, everything will fall apart." Mercy felt a cold sweat on her brow. What did they mean by the source of her power? And why did Judith seem so different now? That night, Mercy knelt by her bed and prayed, "Lord, reveal the truth to me. If Judith is walking a dangerous path, show me what to do." As Mercy drifted to sleep, she had a vivid dream. She saw Judith standing in a dark forest, surrounded by shadowy figures. They whispered to her, offering her gold and power. Judith looked frightened but reached out her hand to accept their gifts. When Mercy woke up, her heart was heavy. She knew she had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Mercy became more determined after her dream. She started observing Judith closely, carefully noting every interaction and event in the church. The deeper she looked, the more she saw things that disturbed her. During one service, Judith prayed over a young woman who had been unable to walk for years. As Judith laid hands on her, the woman stood and began to walk, her face shining with joy. The congregation erupted in praise, but Mercy noticed something odd. The woman limped away awkwardly, as if she were unsure of her steps. A week later, the same woman appeared again, claiming to have been healed once more. Mercy couldn't hold back her curiosity. After the service, she approached the woman. "Sister, wasn't it last week that Judith healed you?" Mercy asked gently. The woman hesitated before smiling nervously. "Oh, yes, but sometimes miracles take time to fully work." Mercy nodded politely, but her suspicion grew. Something wasn't adding up. That night, Mercy decided to dig deeper. She remembered the strange men who often lingered around Judith after services. One of them, a man named Kalechi, always sat in the back row, quietly observing. Mercy decided to follow him after church. Keeping a safe distance, she watched as Kalechi entered a small guest house at the edge of town. She waited outside, hidden in the shadows, until she saw him leave. Taking a deep breath, Mercy approached the receptionist. "Excuse me," she said sweetly. "I think I left something in my brother's room. Can I check quickly?" The receptionist hesitated but handed her the key. Mercy entered the room, her heart pounding. Inside, she found a notebook filled with names and amounts of money. Next to some names were notes like "fake blind man," 10K, and "crippled woman," 15K. Mercy's blood ran cold. It was all staged. The healings, the miracles, they were lies. The next morning, Mercy tried to speak with Judith. She approached her after a service, but Judith seemed distracted and distant. "Sister Judith," Mercy said softly, "I've noticed some strange things happening in the church. Can we talk?" Judith's smile faltered for a moment before she regained her composure. "Mercy, my dear, there's nothing strange happening here. It's just the power of God at work." But Mercy caught a flicker of fear in Judith's eyes. It was then she realized that Judith might not be as in control as she appeared. Meanwhile, Judith's own life was unraveling. Though her fame grew, so did the weight of the sacrifices she had made. Night after night, she was plagued by strange dreams. She saw herself standing by a river, where dark figures emerged from the water, whispering her name. "Judith," they called, their voices like the wind through dry leaves. "Your time is near." She would wake up in a cold sweat, her chest tight with fear. The emptiness she had felt since the night of her initiation was growing. No matter how much praise she received, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. One night, after a particularly haunting dream, Judith decided to confront Reverend Ben. She found him alone in his office, his face lit by the glow of a single candle. "Reverend," she began hesitantly, "I need to ask you something." "Go on," he said, without looking up from the papers on his desk. Are we truly doing God's work?" Her voice trembled. Reverend Ben looked up sharply. "What kind of question is that?" Judith took a step back, startled by the anger in his eyes. "It's just, feel different. Me. And the things I've seen." Reverend Ben stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Judith, you made a covenant. You don't get to question it now. Power comes at a price, and you agreed to pay it." His words hit Judith like a slap. She realized that whatever she had stepped into, it wasn't about faith or serving God. It was about control and greed. But even as doubt consumed her, she felt trapped. The power she had gained wasn't something she could walk away from. The dark figures in her dreams had warned her of the consequences of breaking the covenant, and she was too afraid to find out what those consequences might be. As Judith struggled with her inner turmoil, Mercy continued her investigation. She started sharing her concerns with a few trusted members of the congregation, urging them to pray for clarity. One evening, Mercy received an anonymous note slipped under her door. It read, "Meet me at the old chapel at midnight. Come alone." Mercy's heart pounded as she read the note. It could be a trap, but she felt compelled to go. That night, she wrapped herself in a shawl and made her way to the chapel, her footsteps echoing in the empty streets. Inside, she found a man waiting for her. It was Kelechi, the man she had followed to the guest house. "You've been asking questions," he said, his voice low. "Do you want to know the truth?" "Yes," Mercy replied firmly. Kelechi hesitated before speaking. Judith was chosen because of her faith, but she was deceived. The power she wields doesn't come from God. It comes from, he paused, looking around nervously, "another source." "What source?" Mercy demanded. Kelechi glanced at the shadows as if expecting someone to emerge. "She was initiated into a dark covenant. Every miracle is a lie, and every healing is staged. The offerings you see, they're used to strengthen the covenant." Mercy felt a wave of nausea. She had suspected something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed was almost too much to bear. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kelechi shook his head. "It's not easy to break such bonds. Judith herself may not survive if she tries to leave." Mercy left the chapel that night with a heavy heart. She knew the battle ahead would be dangerous, but she also knew she couldn't remain silent. Judith needed saving, even if she didn't realize it yet. Mercy woke the next morning with renewed resolve. She gathered the few members of the congregation who shared her doubts and told them everything Kelechi had revealed. Together they decided to act. The group began to pray fervently for Judith, asking for guidance and protection as they prepared to confront her. Meanwhile, Judith's nightmares grew worse. The dark figures in her dreams now had faces of the people she had deceived, their eyes filled with sorrow and accusation. One night, the whispers turned to screams. "Judith, you promised us your soul. There's no escape." She woke up trembling, her room filled with an oppressive silence. For the first time, she realized that the power she had sought had cost her more than she could bear. She no longer felt human. The following Sunday, Judith walked into the church, her head held high despite the turmoil within. The congregation cheered as she took the pulpit, but their applause sounded hollow to her ears. Mercy and her group sat silently, watching her closely. Mercy had prayed for the courage to confront Judith, and now the moment had come. As Judith began to preach, Mercy stood up. "Sister Judith," she said, her voice steady but firm, "we need to talk." The room fell silent. Judith froze, her eyes narrowing. "Mercy, this is not the time." "No," Mercy said, stepping forward. "This is the perfect time. You've been leading us, but it's clear that you've strayed from God's path. We need the truth." The congregation gasped, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Judith's hands gripped the pulpit, her face a mask of fury and fear. "How dare you question me in God's house?" Mercy didn't flinch. "This isn't about you, Judith. It's about all of us. We've trusted you, and now we're seeing things that don't align with God's word. If you're truly a servant of God, then you'll have nothing to hide." Judith's eyes darted around the room, seeking Reverend Ben, but he was nowhere to be found. She realized she was alone. "Enough," she shouted, her voice trembling. "You have no idea what I've sacrificed to bring this church to where it is today." "That's the problem," Mercy replied. "God doesn't demand sacrifices like that. If what you've done isn't of Him, then it's time to stop and seek His forgiveness." Judith's heart raced. The dark whispers filled her mind, urging her to silence Mercy. But another voice, a faint, distant voice, broke through. It was her mother's voice, reminding her of the simple faith she had once known. For the first time in years, Judith felt a flicker of doubt. Suddenly the air grew heavy. A loud, unnatural wind blew through the church, extinguishing the candles. The congregation screamed, some falling to their knees in fear. The dark figures from Judith's dreams appeared, their forms shadowy and menacing. "Judith," they called in unison. "You belong to us." Judith fell to the ground, clutching her head. "No," she screamed. "Leave me alone." Mercy ran to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Judith, listen to me. They have no power over you if you turn back to God. You can still be free." Judith looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how. I'm too far gone." "It's never too late," Mercy said, her voice filled with conviction. "But you have to let go of the power and the lies. Trust in God, Judith. He will forgive you." The shadows loomed closer, their voices growing louder. "She's ours. She can't escape." Mercy stood her ground, leading the congregation in prayer. Slowly, the darkness began to fade, replaced by a warm, golden light that filled the church. Judith felt something break inside her, a chain, heavy and suffocating, shattering into pieces. She collapsed into Mercy's arms, sobbing. When the light faded, the church was silent. The congregation stared in awe as Judith stood, her face filled with both sorrow and peace. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I let my pride and greed lead me astray. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I will do everything I can to make things right." The congregation began to clap, but Mercy raised her hand to stop them. "This isn't about applause. It's about true repentance. Judith, if you're serious, then your actions will show it." Judith nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I'll start by returning all the offerings and helping those I've hurt." Over the next few weeks, Judith dismantled the empire she had built. She confessed to the congregation, returned the money she had taken, and sought forgiveness from those she had wronged. Reverend Ben disappeared, his whereabouts unknown, but Judith knew she had to face the consequences of her actions alone. She gave up the church and returned to her village, seeking to rebuild her faith from the ground up. As for Mercy, she continued to serve as a beacon of light in the community, reminding everyone of the importance of discernment and true faith. The moral: blind faith can lead to destruction, but true faith, guided by love and discernment, brings light even in the darkest times. Always seek the truth, and never be afraid to stand for what is right, even when it's hard. Thank you for watching. Hope you learned something from this story. If you're new here, please subscribe to our channel, comment, like, and share our stories to your loved ones. And kindly turn on the notification bell to be notified anytime we post interesting stories like this. We celebrate you. Bye.